The night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that seeped into the bones and reminded everyone passing by that winter in the city showed no mercy. People hurried along the sidewalks, clutching their coats tighter, their eyes fixed forward, desperate to reach the warmth of home. None of them noticed the small figure huddled near the entrance of a closed bakery, her knees drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped around herself as though her tiny body could shield her from the icy wind. Her name was Amelia, though no one on the street knew it. At just 7 years old, she had already learned what abandonment felt like. A few weeks earlier, her parents had left her at a bus station with nothing but a worn backpack and the promise that they would be back soon. She had waited for hours clutching the strap of her bag, trying to believe them. But the hours turned into a night, and the night turned into days. They never came back. At first, Amelia wandered with a mixture of fear and hope. She tried asking for help, but strangers avoided her eyes, muttered something under their breath, or simply walked faster. A little girl alone in a big city was invisible unless she caused trouble, and Amelia had learned quickly that crying too loudly or begging too persistently only made people push her further away. Hunger became a constant companion. She scavenged leftover sandwiches from trash bins, behind cafes, drank from public fountains, and slept wherever her body gave out. On some nights, she pretended the shadows beside her were her mother's arms, rocking her to sleep. But when she opened her eyes in the morning, all she saw was the cold pavement and the indifference of a world that had forgotten her. One evening, as the city lights flickered on and the streets began to empty, Amelia curled up under the bakery's awning, shivering violently. The smell of bread lingered faintly in the air, almost cruel in its sweetness. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but she was too exhausted to move. Her eyelids grew heavy, and for the first time, she wondered if closing them might mean never opening them again. It was then that she heard footsteps stop in front of her. Amelia tensed, ready for the sharp words or harsh kicks that sometimes came when she was discovered on private property. But instead, a soft, uncertain voice broke the silence. "Oh my God, sweetheart, what are you doing here?" Amelia blinked up through blurry eyes. A woman stood above her, clutching a grocery bag in one hand. Her face was pale from the cold, framed by loose strands of brown hair that escaped her woolen scarf. She looked tired, as if life had worn her down, yet her eyes held something Amelia hadn't seen in weeks: concern. Genuine, human concern. The little girl wanted to answer, but her lips trembled too much. She lowered her gaze, afraid that if she spoke, the woman would turn away like all the others. But the woman didn't leave. She crouched down, placing her bag aside, and reached out slowly, as if afraid she might startle the child. "Are you alone? Where are your parents?" Amelia's throat burned as she whispered, "They're gone." The woman's heart clenched. She herself was no stranger to loneliness. A single mother, raising a son who had left for college, she had spent years juggling jobs to make ends meet. She knew what it meant to feel abandoned by life. And now, here was this fragile child, trembling in front of her, with no one to care. For a long moment, the woman hesitated. She wasn't rich. She barely had enough to cover rent and food. Taking in a child, especially a stranger, was unthinkable. But as Amelia's wide, tear-filled eyes met hers, she felt something stir deep inside, a quiet conviction that if she walked away, this little girl's story would end in tragedy. The woman stayed crouched in front of Amelia for what felt like an eternity. The sounds of the city blurred into the background. The distant hum of traffic, the honking of impatient drivers, the muffled laughter from a bar across the street. None of it mattered. All she saw was a little girl who looked like she hadn't been hugged in weeks. "My name is Claire," she finally said, her voice gentle, steady. "What's yours?" Amelia hesitated, her lips trembling before the word escaped. Amelia. "That's a beautiful name," Claire said softly, forcing a smile despite the ache in her chest. "Amelia, are you hungry?" The girl nodded almost imperceptibly, though her eyes betrayed the desperation she was trying to hide. Claire opened her grocery bag and pulled out a small loaf of bread. She tore a piece and handed it over. Amelia snatched it with trembling fingers and devoured it as though it might vanish any second. Watching her, Claire felt her throat tighten. She had seen hardship before, neighbors losing jobs, friends going through divorces. But this was different. This was raw survival. "You can't stay out here," Claire murmured, almost to herself. "It's too cold." Amelia froze, the bread still clutched in her hands. She looked up with a flicker of hope in her eyes, but also fear. Strangers rarely offered more than a passing glance, and when they did, it usually ended with police officers or social workers, not kindness. Claire's mind raced. She thought of her small apartment, the second bedroom her son once occupied, before moving away. It was barely more than a box with peeling wallpaper, but it was warm. It was safe. Yet doubts flooded her. Could she really take this child in? Could she afford another mouth to feed? Her own life had been a series of sacrifices. Divorced young, she had raised her son alone, working nights at a diner, and mornings cleaning offices. Now, with him gone, she lived modestly, but managed. Taking in Amelia might tip the fragile balance she had worked so hard to maintain. But as she looked at the little girl, thin, exhausted, clinging to that crust of bread, like it was the only thing anchoring her to life, Claire knew the answer. Some choices weren't about logic. They were about heart. She reached out a hand. "Come with me, Amelia. You can stay at my place tonight. Just tonight. We'll figure the rest out tomorrow." Amelia stared at the hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, she didn't move. Years of fear and rejection had taught her not to trust too quickly. But the kindness in Claire's eyes melted through her defenses. Slowly, cautiously, she placed her small hand into the woman's. The contact was electric. Claire's fingers closed around hers, firm but tender, and Amelia felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: safety. They walked together through the dimly lit streets. Claire carried the grocery bag in one arm, and Amelia's trust in the other. When they reached the modest apartment building, Amelia's steps faltered. The warmth spilling from the lobby was overwhelming after so many nights in the cold. Inside the apartment, the little girl's gaze darted everywhere. The faded couch, the family photos on the wall, the worn rug with a pattern that had almost disappeared. To Amelia, it was more beautiful than any palace. Claire set down her things and motioned toward the small kitchen table. "Sit. I'll make you some soup." Amelia obeyed silently, her eyes fixed on Claire, as though she feared the woman might disappear if she blinked. When the steaming bowl of soup was placed in front of her, tears welled up unbidden. It wasn't just food, it was care. Claire sat across from her, watching her eat with quiet determination. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She didn't know if the authorities would question her decision or if her finances would hold out. But in that moment, she knew she had made the right choice. Because sometimes, family isn't the one you're born into. It's the one that chooses you. And on that cold night, in a small apartment lit by a single lamp, Amelia found the first flicker of hope she thought she had lost forever. Life with Claire was never easy, But for Amelia, it was the closest thing to paradise she had ever known. The tiny apartment smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old wood, and though the wallpaper peeled at the corners and the heating clanked noisily in winter, it was a world away from the cold sidewalks she had once called home. Every morning, Claire rose before dawn. She would make coffee in a chipped mug, tie her hair back with an elastic that had lost its stretch, and head out to one of her 2 jobs. Some days, she cleaned office buildings, scrubbing floors until her hands ached. Other days, she worked the lunch shift at a diner, smiling at strangers while balancing heavy trays. When one job ended, another began. And yet, no matter how exhausted she looked when she walked through the door at night, Claire always greeted Amelia with the same soft smile and a simple question: "How was school, sweetheart?" At first, Amelia didn't know how to answer. School was intimidating. She had arrived with clothes too big for her frame in a second-hand backpack Claire had picked up at a thrift shop. Other children whispered, sometimes laughed, and she often ate lunch alone. But each evening, when she told Claire about her day, the loneliness, the teasing, the tiny victories of learning a new word or solving a math problem, Claire listened as though every detail mattered. "You're braver than you think, Claire," would remind her, cupping Amelia's cheek with a tired hand. "Don't let them tell you who you are. You'll show them with time." The bond between them grew in small, ordinary ways. On Saturdays, they would share pancakes made from a mix Claire stretched as far as she could. Sometimes they added blueberries if they could afford them. Most times, it was just plain. Amelia didn't care. She cherished those mornings when they sat together laughing at the odd shapes the pancakes took, pretending one looked like a heart or another like a crooked star. Money was always tight. Claire clipped coupons, religiously juggled bills, and sometimes skipped meals, so Amelia wouldn't have to. Amelia noticed, even when Claire tried to hide it. One evening, when Claire's stomach growled while she insisted she wasn't hungry, Amelia pushed her half-eaten plate toward her. "You need it more than me, Mama," she said softly. It was the first time she had called her that. Claire's eyes brimmed with tears, and she hugged the little girl so tightly that Amelia thought she might never let go. School gradually became less daunting. Amelia discovered that she loved reading. Books became her refuge, her secret doorway into worlds where children weren't abandoned and families always found their way back to each other. Claire encouraged this passion, bringing home worn paperbacks she found at thrift stores or libraries that sold discarded copies for pennies. At night, while Claire folded laundry or mended clothes, Amelia would read aloud to her. Sometimes Claire closed her eyes, letting the words wash over her, her exhaustion eased by the sound of Amelia's voice. Other times, she would laugh at the funny passages or wipe a tear when the story turned sad. These shared moments built something stronger than blood. They built trust, love, and the sense of belonging Amelia had craved her entire life. Yet life continued to test them. Winters were brutal. The heating in the apartment broke down more than once, leaving them bundled together under blankets, sipping cheap cocoa Claire had managed to buy. Summers brought sweltering heat, the fan rattling in protest as they tried to sleep. But through it all, Amelia learned resilience, not from lectures, but from watching the way Claire carried herself. No matter how heavy the world seemed, Claire never complained in front of her. She laughed when she could find joy in little things: a flower blooming on the sidewalk, a kind customer leaving an extra tip, Amelia's drawings taped proudly to the fridge. "Happiness doesn't have to be big," she often said. "It just has to be real." As Amelia grew older, she began to shoulder some of the weight. She helped with chores, learned how to cook simple meals, and sometimes accompanied Claire to the diner, sitting in the back booth with her homework while her foster mother worked. The staff adored her, slipping her extra fries or a slice of pie. Customers noticed, too, this small, polite girl with determined eyes, studying as though her life depended on it. And, in a way, it did. Amelia knew education was her way forward. She poured herself into her studies, driven not just by ambition, but by gratitude. Every grade she earned, every page she mastered, felt like a gift she was offering back to Claire. She wanted to make her proud. She wanted to prove that Claire's sacrifice wasn't in vain. Still, there were moments of doubt. Nights when the homework felt impossible, when classmates mocked her old clothes, when she wondered if she would ever truly belong. In those moments, Claire was her anchor. She would sit beside Amelia, holding her hand, whispering, "You're stronger than the world believes, and I believe in you always." Years slipped by in this rhythm of hardship and love. The apartment never grew larger. The bills never stopped arriving. But Amelia's heart expanded in ways she could never have imagined back on the streets. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, valued, and most importantly, loved. One rainy afternoon, as they sat by the window, watching raindrops race down the glass, Amelia leaned her head on Claire's shoulder. "I'm going to make something of myself one day," she said quietly. "And when I do, I'll take care of you the way you've taken care of me." Claire kissed the top of her head, smiling through tears. "Sweetheart, you already have. You've given me a reason to keep going." Neither of them knew and just how prophetic those words would be. But in that tiny, weathered apartment, built on sacrifice and unconditional love, the seeds of Amelia's future were being planted, seeds that would one day bloom into something extraordinary. By the time Amelia entered high school, she had already developed a reputation for being the quiet girl with a relentless work ethic. Teachers noticed the way she lingered after class to ask questions, the way her notebooks were filled with meticulous handwriting, every page organized with determination. Some classmates admired her, others mocked her. Teachers' pet, they would whisper, "Poor girl, trying too hard." Amelia pretended not to hear, but the words stung. There were nights she came home, dropped her bag on the floor, and buried her face in her pillow, letting the tears soak into the fabric. But Claire always noticed. She would sit on the edge of the bed, stroking Amelia's hair, and remind her, "They don't know your story, and you don't need their approval. You only need to keep believing in yourself." Those words became Amelia's mantra. High school was tougher than anything she had faced before. The workload was heavier, and the pressure to think about college loomed over her. But Amelia clung to her studies as if they were a lifeline. She joined the debate team, surprising even herself, with the fire in her voice when she spoke about justice, equality, and opportunity. She spent evenings in the library, hunched over textbooks, long after other students had left. Claire watched her with pride, though worry gnawed at her constantly. Tuition, even with scholarships, would be nearly impossible. She didn't want Amelia to feel limited, but the reality of their finances hung over them like a storm cloud. Still, she never said no to her daughter's dreams. Instead, she encouraged her, apply everywhere, dream big. If anyone can make it, it's you. One pivotal night arrived when Amelia discovered she had been selected as a finalist for a prestigious scholarship. She came running home, the letter clutched in her hands, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mama, they picked me. I get to interview next month. Claire dropped the dish she was washing, soap bubbles spilling over the sink as she rushed to hug her daughter. Oh, sweetheart, I knew it. I knew they'd see what I see. The weeks leading up to the interview were nerve-wracking. Amelia practiced endlessly, her answers, her posture, even the way she smiled. Claire would sit across from her at the kitchen table, pretending to be one of the stern panelists. "Why should we choose you over hundreds of others?" she would ask. Amelia, her pounding, would answer with as much conviction as she could muster. "Because I know what it means to fight for a chance. I won't waste it." The morning of the interview, Amelia wore the only blazer they could afford, a second-hand piece Claire had altered with careful stitches. She looked in the mirror, smoothing the sleeves nervously. Claire came up behind her, placed her hands on her shoulders, and whispered, "You look like the woman you're meant to become." The interview was grueling. The panelists asked about her grades, her extracurriculars, her goals. They pressed her on how she would handle setbacks. For a moment, fear threatened to silence her. But then she thought of Claire, of the long nights working double shifts so Amelia could have notebooks and books to study from. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and spoke from her heart. "I know I'm not the typical candidate. I wasn't born into privilege. I've had to work for every opportunity, every small step forward. But that has taught me resilience. I don't just want to succeed for myself. I want to prove that children like me, children who have been abandoned, who have been told they'll never amount to anything, can rise. And I want to use my education to make sure others never feel invisible the way I once did." The room was silent for a moment. Then, one of the panelists nodded slowly, scribbling something on his notepad. Weeks later, the acceptance letter arrived. Amelia had won the scholarship. It covered her tuition, her books, even part of her living expenses. She screamed with joy, spinning around the apartment as Claire clapped her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. That night, they celebrated with a modest dinner pasta with tomato sauce and a small cake Claire had bought from the bakery. It was simple, but to them it felt like a feast. Amelia raised her fork like a toast. "To us, Mama. To everything we've survived." Claire lifted her glass of water. "To your future sweetheart. And to the woman you're becoming." As the years unfolded, Amelia threw herself into her studies at university. Life on campus was overwhelming. At first, wealthy students with designer clothes, discussions she felt unprepared for. She often felt like an outsider, the girl with secondhand shoes and a heart full of ambition. But every time she doubted herself, she remembered Claire's words. She worked part-time jobs, tutoring, waitressing, even shelving books in the campus library. Some nights, she returned to her dorm, exhausted, her hands aching from hours on her feet, but she never let it deter her. Each paycheck, no matter how small, reminded her of where she had come from and why she couldn't give up. Slowly, she began to excel. Professors noticed her sharp insights, her willingness to challenge ideas. She earned internships that exposed her to the professional world, where her resilience became an asset rather than a burden. Each success, each step forward, wasn't just hers, it belonged to Claire too. One winter break, Amelia came home and found Claire sitting at the kitchen table, her hands rough from cleaning jobs. Amelia placed her report card in front of her straight A's. Claire covered her mouth, overcome with pride. Amelia whispered, "I'm doing this for us, Mama. Every grade, every class, it's all for you." Claire shook her head, tears shining in her eyes. "No, sweetheart, you're doing it for yourself. And that's exactly what I always dreamed for you. What Amelia didn't realize then was that she had already stepped onto a path that would not only change her own life, but inspire countless others. The little girl once abandoned at a bus station was on her way to becoming a voice, a force, a symbol of what determination and love could create. Graduating from university was a moment Amelia would never forget. Standing in her cap and gown, she searched the crowd until her eyes found Claire, sitting in the back row, her hands clasped tightly, tears streaming down her face. When Amelia walked across the stage to receive her diploma, she held it high, not just for herself, but for the woman who had made everything possible. After the ceremony, Claire hugged her so tightly, Amelia could hardly breathe. "You did it, sweetheart," Claire whispered. "You've already given me more than I ever dreamed." But for Amelia, this was only the beginning. She entered the professional world with the same determination that had carried her through childhood. The early years were difficult. Employers often overlooked her for positions favoring candidates with polished resumes and prestigious family connections. But Amelia refused to give up. She accepted entry-level work, arriving early, staying late, and volunteering for projects others avoided. She soaked up knowledge like a sponge, every obstacle fueling her drive to prove herself. Slowly, doors began to open. Her dedication caught the attention of mentors who recognized her potential. She was promoted first to team leader, then to manager. Each step forward was another brick in the foundation she was building for herself and Claire. But success, Amelia believed, wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder. She remembered the nights spent on the streets, the loneliness of feeling invisible, the way Claire's kindness had transformed her life. She wanted to create that same transformation for others. So she began to volunteer, mentoring young girls from disadvantaged backgrounds, visiting shelters, speaking at schools. Her story resonated. Students who once felt hopeless looked at her and thought, if she can do it, maybe I can too. Organizations invited her to share her journey, and soon she became a voice of inspiration. One pivotal moment came when she was invited to deliver a keynote speech at a national conference. Standing before hundreds of people, Amelia felt the weight of her past pressing against her chest. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I was once a child left behind," she began, "abandoned, forgotten with nothing but the clothes on my back. But someone who had little to give, but gave anyway, chose to believe in me. And that belief changed everything. Today, I stand here not as a miracle, but as proof of what love and perseverance can build." The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause. That night, news outlets covered her speech, calling her a beacon of hope for the next generation. With recognition came opportunity. Amelia launched her own initiative, an organization dedicated to supporting foster children and youth experiencing homelessness. She raised funds, built programs for education and mentorship, and created scholarships for students who reminded her of herself. The little girl who had once felt invisible was now building bridges for others to be seen. Through it all, Claire remained her anchor. She still lived in the same modest apartment, still worked part-time jobs, despite Amelia begging her to retire. "It keeps me busy," Claire would say with a smile. But Amelia knew it was more than that. Claire had always been a woman who found dignity in hard work. One evening, Amelia came home with a set of keys in her hand. She led Claire outside, where a small house with a garden waited. "It's ours," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "No more leaky pipes, no more broken heaters. You've given me everything. Let me give this to you." Claire's hands shook as she accepted the keys. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling Amelia into her arms. "You were always the greatest gift I ever received. This house is just icing on the cake." For Amelia, the real success wasn't in the titles she earned or the awards she received. It was in moments like these, seeing Claire's smile, knowing she had fulfilled her promise to take care of the woman who had once chosen her. Years later, at another ceremony, Amelia stood on stage to accept a humanitarian award for her work with disadvantaged youth. As cameras flashed and applause filled the room, she glanced at Claire, sitting in the front row, older now, but still with the same proud sparkle in her eyes. When Amelia took the microphone, she didn't list her achievements or thank her colleagues first. She turned toward Claire. "This award belongs to one person," she said, her voice breaking. "To my mother. She wasn't bound to me by blood, but by choice. When the world turned its back, she opened her arms. Every success I have is because of her. Mama, this is for you." The audience erupted in emotion, some wiping tears, others clapping furiously. And in that moment, Amelia knew she had come full circle. The abandoned child had become a leader. The invisible girl had become a light. And through it all, she never forgot the woman who had seen her when no one else did. Years passed, and Amelia's name became known not just within her field, but across the country. She was no longer just the girl who beat the odds. She was an author, a speaker, a founder of programs that lifted thousands of children out of hopelessness. Her life was a story that many wanted to hear, but for her, the spotlight was never the goal. It was simply a tool to help more people. Still amid the whirlwind of achievements, Claire's health began to decline. Age crept in quietly, at first, a slower step, a hand that shook when holding a teacup. Then came the doctor, visits, the medications, the quiet afternoons spent resting in bed. Amelia, though busier than ever, never failed to be at her side. She rearranged meetings, canceled events, anything, to make sure Claire was never alone. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Amelia sat by Claire's bed in their little house. She held her mother's frail hand, tracing the lines of skin worn from decades of labor. Claire's eyes, though tired, were still filled with that same unshakable love. "You've done so much, sweetheart," Claire whispered, her voice soft but steady. "More than I ever imagined. But do you know what makes me proudest?" Amelia's throat tightened. "What, Mama? That you never let the world make you bitter. You've turned pain into purpose. That's rare, and it's beautiful." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes. She squeezed Claire's hand. "I only became who I am because of you. You saved me when no one else cared. Every step I've taken, it's been to honor you." Claire smiled faintly, brushing away a tear from her daughter's cheek. "Then you've honored me 1,000 times over." Not long after that conversation, Claire passed peacefully in her sleep. The loss shattered Amelia's heart, leaving her adrift in grief. For weeks, she felt as though a part of her had been ripped away. Yet even in sorrow, she found strength in the legacy Claire had given her, the lessons of love, resilience, and compassion. At the funeral, hundreds gathered: friends, neighbors, colleagues, and even some of the young people whose lives had been changed by Amelia's programs. They came not only to honor Claire as Amelia's mother, but to honor the woman whose single act of kindness had unknowingly set off a chain of miracles. Standing before the crowd, Amelia's voice trembled as she delivered the eulogy. My mother was not wealthy. She wasn't powerful in the ways the world usually measures power, but she had a heart that chose to see me when I was invisible, to lift me when I was broken. She taught me that love is not about blood, it's about choice. And because of her, I learned that even the smallest act of kindness can change the entire course of a life. If you carry anything from her story, let it be this: never underestimate the power of compassion. The church was silent, many wiping away tears. It was as though everyone understood that Claire's spirit lived on in Amelia, and in every child, Amelia would go on to help. In the years that followed, Amelia expanded her foundation into an international network. She traveled the world, building schools, funding scholarships, and telling her story to inspire policy changes for children in need. But no matter where she went, she always carried a small locket with Claire's picture inside, close to her heart. On the anniversary of Claire's passing, Amelia returned to the bakery where she had once slept as a frightened little girl. She stood beneath the awning, the air crisp with the scent of bread, and whispered into the night, I'm still here, Mama, and I'll keep going for you, for us, for everyone who needs hope. The wind stirred gently, as though carrying her words upward. In the end, Amelia's story was not simply one of survival or even success. It was a story of transformation, a reminder that even in the darkest alleys, kindness can spark light, that love, freely given, can rewrite destinies. And so her life became a living message, passed on to every child she mentored, every audience she spoke to, every soul who read her words. You are not defined by where you begin. You are defined by how far you choose to rise. Amelia's journey reminds us that hardship does not have the final word. What defines us is not the pain of being abandoned, nor the weight of poverty, but the choices we make in the face of despair, and the people who choose to stand beside us. Claire could have walked past a hungry little girl on the street that night. She could have looked away, convincing herself she had nothing to give. Instead, she opened her arms, and because of that one act of compassion, a life was transformed. We live in a world that often measures success by wealth, status, or fame. But Amelia's story tells a different truth. The greatest legacies are born from love, resilience, and the courage to lift someone else up. Wherever you are, whatever you face, know this: your beginnings do not determine your destiny. And sometimes, the smallest kindness can become the spark that lights another's path. Amelia rose from the cold streets to become a voice of hope. But in her heart, she would always be the little girl who was saved by love, and the woman who carried that love forward to countless others. And so the story ends not with sorrow, but with a promise that even in the darkest corners, light can be found and shared.